Okay, we'll go ahead and get started this morning. What we're going to continue working on is our React shopping cart that we started in a video yesterday, and we got pretty far. Definitely have, I'm just guessing about halfway. So we have more to go. And yesterday, um, a lot of times in these videos, I'm moving pretty fast with the intent on just getting through a lot of material. And so kind of ran across some code yesterday that I didn't really explain very well, and because I didn't stop to think about it, and then I did. I stopped to think about it, and I thought I owed a better explanation on React hooks. And so on a part of hooks, and so to kind of even back up a little bit, out of the cart, the shopping cart. Right now we call app, and then app calls cart list, and our cart list is really just a bunch of cart items. Now we'll add to this cart list. But I want to demonstrate even just kind of maybe more simply. So if I have index calls app, app calls cart list calls cart item. I thought I could just briefly demonstrate hooks in a new file, and I'll just kind of call this new file instead, and I'll just call this demo component.js, and we're going to say function demo component. Now all I'm really going to do here is demonstrate a little bit more on hooks that I didn't explain yesterday. So export default demo component. We'll add in a little fragment. Okay. And so we'll bring this in at the app level, and just underneath cart list, I'll kind of click this here so it adds the import up at the top, and add a demo component underneath my cart list. And we should just get an H1 of my demo component. So let's go ahead and npm start this. Oop, that doesn't look like it typed in the right place, but there it is, npm start. It's booting up. Okay, so we got, this is my demo component. So my component is working. So I kind of introduced this idea of state yesterday, state being data that's on the page, and kind of loading that state into a hook. And then, so the way that we did that was with this import use state from React. And then again, it's just kind of like, where do you write the code? We create our state variables inside of our function. And so kind of above this return, we could say const age, set age equals use state, and then in the parentheses, you kind of say default number of 5. So it's like, hey, this age variable is going to have the default value of 5. And the way to change that variable is with set age. Then where you define the hook, we kind of showed how you could pass it down. So I would just say age equals age, and we're passing this set age equals set age. And so we're passing the data down to the component and we're passing the function down to the component. Which then allows us to accept it in here with props. And so you could pass from parent to child, which is what we're doing here, the parent being app. You're passing the state down to the child. And then you can access it through props.age. And so you could just say the user's age is, and you could say props.age, and again, that's coming from here. The property is age, so this dot age comes from there. You can see the user's age is 5. So here's the next step is like, hey, we wanted to allow the age to change. Okay, so here's the explanation that I needed to go a little bit deeper into detailing. So useState returns, this is a function, and it returns two things, which is kind of interesting in itself, that a function can return two values. Again, I would kind of encourage you to go back and see how that all works with later versions of JavaScript. Usually, historically, functions can only return one piece of thing, one data, but now you can actually have functions return multiple things, and so that's what this is doing. And we're essentially, the first is kind of an array on the left, right? So this is angle brackets. Is how you have to receive the data. And so the first thing is a constant. Age is a constant. And so you cannot modify age directly. The only way to modify age is with this mutator method called setAge. And so useState returns two things. Number one, it returns a value for the variable, for the constant age, and it returns a function called setAge. The only way to modify this age variable is through the mutator setAge. And so if I do a button on click, and here maybe EVT, there we go, arrow. So on click, we're going into JavaScript world with the curlies. setAge, and this is kind of what, and now it's props.setAge, props.setAge. And what I did yesterday is I did age++. Props.age++. The problem with this code is that age++ actually modifies that variable. It increments age. Well, you can't. Age is a constant. So this was erroring out yesterday because we were trying to modify a constant. Essentially, age is a constant. Versus if we write this a little bit differently and you say age plus 1. Now this is an expression. It's not modifying age. It's just adding 1 to age, right? And it's actually just going to do some math. So this results in an equation, an expression that says, hey, the age is 5, add 1 to it, that's 6. We're not modifying age directly. We're passing the value of 6 to a mutator called setAge. And this is just doing math. It's not modifying this age value. So, kind of save that here, and we should be able to put a add year, and you can see that age is being modified when we do it accordingly. Okay. However, if I go back to what I did yesterday, props.age++, this is a good lesson because there you go, cannot assign to a read-only property age. So it errors out. So this is a good lesson in how hooks work. It's an important thing to realize that going back to demo component, going back to app, we are not modifying the data. We are changing it completely through the mutator. Why is that important? We're not modifying that variable. It's a constant, so it's not going to change. The only way to change it is through the mutator setAge. If we go back to a little bit of the code that we wrote yesterday, here we have an array of items, and the way to change it is with setItems. When I want to change one of these items, and for example, what we did yesterday is we changed the names. We allowed it to change a name. We're going to call setItems. So here's our setItems mutator. And when we call setItems, we loop through our items, we loop through our array, and we completely replace that array. We're not just modifying that array right here. We're not modifying the items array. We are completely replacing it. And it basically boils down to this. We are calling setItems, and we are passing objects, either a modified object, so if the IDs match, then we update, we spread the object and we update the name and then pass that object into our array, or we pass the element as it is unmodified. And so here we've got 3 items. When we call setItems, this loop, essentially this map function, is looping over our items, and we are completely replacing all of the elements in our array with a new array with one modified element. Okay, so that is the uniqueness that is this useState hook. We're not just going to kind of go into items and then find tie and then modify tie and leave the others the same. Okay, that wouldn't work. We're just going to create a new array. We're going to pass that new array to the setItems method, and it's just going to so happen that the new array is going to have a lot of the same data that the old array had. So for example, for changing tie, hat will remain unchanged, belt will remain unchanged, and we're just going to change the name of tie in this one line right here. Okay, so I kind of got into that yesterday where I'm like, I remember that it was kind of unique in how this worked, and that is the kind of difference in how you might think it would work. Would be like, hey, I've got this array of items, I need to update the tie, so I'm just going to update this one thing and I'm going to leave the rest unchanged. No, we're going to replace the entire array. We're going to replace the entire array with a new array with one modified object in it. So that's why we kind of had to write our logic the way that we did, and call this setItems. And again, I know I'm being repetitive here, leave the unmodified object in our array, or the modified object here. So I hope that makes sense, because it's just a unique way that this works. Now, we also introduced a library called Lodash. And here's what Lodash is. I kind of mentioned this yesterday. JavaScript has a bunch of useful built-in functions. Okay, and JavaScript is kind of evolving every year. Every year, they kind of release a new version of ECMAScript, right? And so, but Lodash, if you kind of npm Lodash, this is a very popular Lodash. This is a very popular library of basically useful functions. And the document is lodash.com. A modern JavaScript utility library, again, just a bunch of functions and utilities for delivering modularity, performance, and extras. And so, yeah, it's a popular library. It kind of allowed us to write the reason I like it is allows us to write this very condensed mapping function where we loop through our items and check for an ID and do all this. Versus there is a map function just kind of looking at the difference between the Lodash map, like the syntax different. This takes it's Lodash, it's our underscore dot map. Your first argument is your items array that you're looping over. And then what do you do with each item? Versus your array.map is, you can kind of see it's items.map. So these are two mapping functions. One's built into JavaScript, one's built into Lodash. The syntax is a little bit different. So I chose to use Lodash map instead of the array.map built into JavaScript. Okay. So that's kind of the warm up for today. I went ahead and opened up the Lab 0501. This is essentially what we're doing. At the end of the day, this is what we're creating. So we've got this lab open up. Essentially, if you're following along, I might even be changing some of these requirements, but this is what we're building. It's going to be pretty straightforward. So far, let's look at a current state of the application, and should have this booted up already at localhost 3000. And I could take the demo component out, no longer need demo component. Okay, so there we go. And the way this is working is it does have all that going on. We don't have our buttons because that was all changing how to increment and decrement the quantities. So that's kind of the next thing to work on, is the increment and decrement quantities. No longer using the age and set age and really demo component. We can close that down. That was just for demonstration purposes. So cart list. So again, index starts the app. App calls cart list. Cart list right now is just looping through our cart items. And we wrote a function to modify the name. So let's do another function. Function on quantity add EVT item. It's going to be very similar. It's going to call set items and use the Lodash map, the items array, and again, realize that X represents a single item. I would call that item. I would give that variable a name of item, but we already have an item that's being passed into our function. So then you get into naming conflicts. So you just got to realize that this is called a lambda, and that this represents a single item in the items array. And you got to ask, does the ID equal the item ID that's passed in? This is a ternary operator. If it does, then go ahead and spread the item and set the quantity property to go up dot one, x dot quantity. Otherwise, just put the element in there as it is. Okay, so that ends the map. That ends set items, semicolon, save. Now, down here, we need to pass this function down. So this cart item, I can kind of break this up onto multiple lines here. On quantity add, we pass the function. We pass the function down to the child. Just like we did on name change. Now we just got done doing this example where just doing the plus plus didn't work. But you got to realize what we're doing here is we're changing a property inside of an object, and that should be allowable. When you have an object, the object itself is immutable or constant, but you can change the properties inside of an object. So even though we just did this demonstration where the plus plus on an int didn't work, this should work because it's a property inside of an object. So there's a little difference there in the JavaScript world and why that works, or why it should work. Let me throw that caveat in there. So that ends our cart item right there. Now we need to receive that through props. So it's on quantity add. So we'll bring back this button. And we have props, but it's not called set item quantity, it's called on quantity add. Props dot on quantity add. And so we pass in the EVT. Cart item. Okay. There we go. So now we have our quantities going up. So on our call, we got plenty of space. I would imagine if I put a text center on that call, props.quantity, I think I tried a text center yesterday. I'm not sure if I did on the right thing, but now I put it on the right thing. You got to put it on the div, not on the span. The div has the space to center text. The span doesn't really have any space to center text. So yesterday I put text center on the wrong thing. Now we got that in the right space. I guess if you wanted to kind of add this a little differently, right now it's even spacing. We got 3, 3, 3, and 3, adding up to 12. We could do like 4. 4, 7, 10, 12. If we make those 2, I don't know, you got to mess with the spacing and see how you want to mess with it. But basically these calls get to add up to 12. So that would be 4 parts of 12, 3 parts of 12, 2 and 2. However you want to space it apart, that's fine. And then what? So we got this, we got this. Well, guess what? The minus button is going to be just the same. On Bootstrap, you know, you can notice those buttons are rounded. Get Bootstrap. Docs, rounded corners. Rounded corners on the borders. Kind of looks maybe something like I don't know, maybe something like rounded -5. Let's throw a rounded -5 on our button. Okay, I'm cool with that. And then we need a remove button, so we'll bring that back. Of course, here's our function on quantity add. Let's write our function on quantity remove. AVT item, set items, lodash map items, X arrow. Does X ID triple equals item ID question mark? If it does, then spread X, update the quantity to be minus minus X dot quantity. Otherwise, replace it with X, semicolon. So I had to write a couple functions to do that, and let's continue on quantity remove, send the function down. Bring our button back. Props dot on quantity remove. And you pass in the event object. Quantity. And we'll add, I think the mockup has this as red, so we'll say button danger rounded 5. Cool. We are cooking. Okay, so now we kind of have the data in the right place and we're sending the data around. We have an object, an array of objects, which is kind of where you want to be, because in the real world, you know, we're going to be pulling this data out of a database, and guess what? We don't know how many, you know, items a person's going to add into their shopping cart, and so you got to write this code flexible so that you can really, you know, there could be one item here, there could be 10 items or 100 items. You know, so that's kind of what that's ultimately where we need to be. We need to have an array of objects, because at the end of the day, that's what you'll be working with, arrays of objects. When we are receiving data from our back end, you know, we're having that. What do we have here? We have arrays of objects. So there's our first object, there's our second object, there's our third object. So here's an array of objects. So this is what we need to kind of prep for. Back to our cart list. There's a little bit more here, a shopping cart with a quantity, and a button that says add item. So we need to be able to add an item to our array of items. So that's new because we haven't necessarily done adding an item. So let's kind of bring in a little HTML here. Let me go back to my cart list and see what we got so far. So right now, our container is here with our row. I'm gonna take that container and bring it up to the cart list. Okay. That's good. You know, I got everything more center of the page versus on the left. That's a grid system. Just put it in a different column and that's fine. I'm not too worried about that. Kind of like it centered personally, so that's what we're going with. Okay, so let's do an H1 that says shopping cart. So maybe H1, class name, text, okay. I don't think I need the class of text secondary because it's just black, right? So we don't need that class. Okay, then we need some sort of number for item count. So we'll make a hook to kind of store that number because it's going to need to go up and down. Actually, I didn't have that stored in a hook. I just had that in a normal variable now. Okay, let me explain my train of thought here a little bit. When I'm seeing this number, I said it was going to be a hook. Anytime you're working with data and you want that data to refresh, it's been my experience that you want that data in a hook. I think because of the way that we're writing this, it will work not keeping this in a hook, because when you're modifying data in here, it's going to cause a re-rendering of the shopping list, and so modifying an item will re-render the list, and that's when when this list code runs, we're going to write something like outside of a function. And so basically by modifying a cart item, you're modifying the list, and that's going to cause the list to re-render. Therefore, I think that the code that I have written before will work. So you're going to notice this is not going to be in a hook like I anticipated, but it should in fact work. So what we're adding here is this total item count, and so this this number 5 here is the sum of all of the quantities here. And so I'm just going to make a let item count, and this is not in a function, so this is going to run basically when the cart list renders. We're going to do a for loop, a for of loop. So notice, remember in JavaScript there's for in and then there's for of. For in is typically when you're looping over arrays, objects, and for of is when you're looping over an array. For of, we have an array, we're looping over an array of objects, so we're going to do for of. For each item of items. Let me explain that a little bit better. MDN for of. So when you have an array, you loop over with a for of versus a for in, you loop over an object using a for in. So just remember the different kinds of loops in JavaScript. So we're using a for of, looping over our items. We say basically if item is truthy and item has a quantity, then add that quantity to our item count. So this is what's called an accumulator. Item count is an accumulator. You start it off at 0. You loop through your items and add the quantity to your accumulator. And then we get to use that accumulator inside. Let's go back to our mock-up. Here, inside of our heading, we'll just put a little in our JSX item count. So again, I find this piece right here to be the declarative part of JSX. I'm declaring that I want the item count. Details at this stage aren't important to me where I get the item count from. I just know there's a variable called item count, and I'm declaring I want that. So this is, again, JSX is considered declarative, not imperative. So I declare I want an item count. Let's see if this gets our item count. There we go, 6. Adding, subtracting. Again, by changing a component inside of our array, it's getting that to re-render. It's often the case, though, if you're working with a piece of data, I'm telling you, many times you want that data to change on the screen. It's been my experience, you want to consider putting that in a hook. But in this case, because this data is dependent on data that is in a hook, I think that's why we're getting away with it. In the mock-up, that's in some sort of, I think that's Bootstrap pill. Come on, getbootstrap.com, docs. I used to have pills. I used to just do rounded corners, huh? I guess they're called badges now. Pill badges. There we go. Badge, rounded pill. So put the item count inside of a pill. Take a look. And we got to give it a text color and a background color. Text BG primary. Text hyphen BG hyphen primary. There we go. That looks like the mock-up pretty well. I'm good with that. We go up, we go down. We go up, we go down. We essentially are doing a CRUD, because what's part of this lab that I haven't said is basically when you remove this down to 0, when you get this number down to 0, it should just remove it. It should remove the item off of the list. And we're also going to have adding a new item to our list. So we are doing CRUD operations here. Obviously, we're reading off of an array. We're modifying. We are deleting. At some point, we'll delete. And we'll have the add new one as well. So we are cooking. This is going very well. We need a button that says add item. And so let's underneath our H1 button, class name, what is the button primary? Add item. There we go. Big button that says add item. On click, we're going to do something here. Now there's something interesting here. I want to show a very common thing in React that we're going to do. You'll see me doing this quite a bit. Here we're just displaying item count 100% of the time. You can write a little conditional statement, and this is a shorthand syntax. You could say, hey, it's kind of like if item count is greater than 0, you do and that's where we're going to put the span. So check this out. I'm going to refactor this. This is where I'm going to put the item count and put my closing span right here. So that basically, this refactors this where I'm only displaying if the item count is greater than 0, am I displaying this span. So this is a shorthand that's kind of like an if statement. You know, if item count is greater than 0, again, this is one of those newer JavaScript things. This, you know, shorthand notation for saying, hey, if this is truthy, go ahead and make this truthy as well, and execute this. But basically, our item count now, item count needs to go in another set of curlies. So as I that goes away. So if it's above 0, you see it. As soon as it's false and item count is not greater than 0, it goes away. So you'll see this syntax in React quite a bit. That's a really nice little feature to write. Again, here's a JavaScript if statement. If that's true, then execute this and show that. Otherwise, you don't. All right, let's wire up this button click. Here we got this add item. Let's say on click equals JavaScript land. So what are we doing here? When we click this, again, we're going to call set items and pass in a new array with a new item in it. So here's maybe I'll put this on one line to see it a little better at first. We're going to call set items, pass in a new array where we spread the items first, and then we add a new object. That new object has a new nano ID. I'm going to give it an empty name and a quantity of 1. So this is basically adding, again, making a copy of our items array. You could view that as a copy operation, right? We're spreading our items. We're basically making a copy of each item, and then we're adding a new one to the list called add item. And what's that going to do? Well, we're adding a new item to our items array. Therefore, there should be another additional cart item in the list if we click that button. And there you go. We just added a new item to the list. So far, so good. Okay. Want to take it here so that if we get this quantity on any individual one to 0, that it actually removes it off of our items. And so this is on quantity remove. This is where we're going to look at this. Write a little code here. So here, this new quantity is like saying, hey, what are we going to have here? We're going to have the current quantity minus 1. And we could say, if new quantity is greater than 0, then we go ahead and subtract. Right? So let me indent this. Right? If new quantity is greater than 0, right, then you just decrement the quantity. Otherwise, we need to remove that item from the list. So how we're going to do that is we're going to call set items. And here we're going to use a low dash filter. Of course, a filter is going to remove some number of items. Okay, we're looking through our items. And we're going to filter where the ID so this filter is going to keep all of the items where the items IDs are not equal. And so this is a way of it's always almost counterintuitive. You would think that filter, this says what items to keep. And so we keep all of the items where the IDs don't match. When the IDs do match, then that's what's actually removed. That's actually what's filtered. Filter where the IDs don't match. So when the IDs do match, it's this not always throws you off, but you kind of get the idea. When we click on quantity remove, either you decrement the quantity or you remove that item from the array. Kind of the click, 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 click. Very cool. Now the last thing, I think it's on a lab requirement that says if there are no items on the list, give them a little message to add an item. Right, so there's a requirement in here that says, hey, if there's no items in the list, you've removed them all, go ahead and give them a little message. And that can be done. Let's just pick a spot in our markup. So here's our if item count less than or equal to 0, then we're just going to display a little div. Oh, we gotta have and. Okay, so if this is true, display what's on the right hand side. Div, close the div. Your cart is empty, add some items to it. Exclamation point. So this little line only shows up when the cart is empty. Remove, 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 remove. I don't know if that's the right place, but let's throw a little, let's make it bold. Want to show you how to add some custom CSS to this. So there's a lot of places you can add CSS. If you want to write more component specific CSS, you can make kind of like they have here. You have this CSS, app CSS is specific to app and any of its children, right? So you can write CSS here that applies to any. It's kind of a parent that pretty much everything's inside of app. So you could go into app CSS and we should be able to write a little custom CSS here. For example, let me just go into my div here. Class name equals text empty. Right, so I've got a class called text empty, and I could make my own CSS for cart list.css, but I should be able to go into here and do a class of text empty and do color red. Of course I could just use Bootstrap. Font weight bold, font size 3M. Okay, let's see if our class of text empty is applied. Sure enough. Something like that. So you can write custom CSS just as well at the parent, and again, on the component you have to import it, so that's already taken care of. So this is kind of a good global space, if you will, to write some custom CSS if that's what you would like. Of course, you could always just use Bootstrap classes to do all the same styling of your components. Okay, I'm going to pause and just go through the requirements here and make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, the only thing that I'm going to modify, because we got all the requirements, the only thing I'm going to modify is I'm going to let you kind of customize how you want this thing to look. I'm not going to force you to write any custom CSS or any specific CSS. You know, this will be really up to your particular taste and feel. You know, this is not the main part of this course is CSS, but I guess the point is that you can have CSS written in a lot of places. It could be at a parent component, like on app. You could write, because you have cart list.js, we could also write cart list CSS, and then you import, and just like here, you just look at the syntax, import, and then you just give it the path, dot slash cart like that, right? And then in my cart list, if I were to maybe do another class of doesn't really matter, but just call the class move, you know. And then I'm gonna style the class of move margin top 3ems, just kind of move it down, right? You could see, of course, that pushed it down 3ems. Right, so my CSS is being applied. So just to demonstrate how to do that. Now, you know, however you want to modify this. This is this is working in its current state, and you know, I think this is a really good demonstration of how to get up and learning React by doing this kind of, again, CRUD's always a good example of an app where you're doing all these different useful operations on a set of data. All right, we'll stop this here.